Well, hello everyone. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. After taking some time with my family for Christmas and New Year's, on January the 2nd, I returned to Washington, D.C. for what would turn out to be a very wild first week of the 118th Congress. But I wasn't really surprised that things went the way that they did because during the campaign for the midterm elections, many Republicans campaigned on shaking up the status quo. And shaking up the norm is exactly what happened at the beginning of the 118th Congress. The world witnessed something that is rarely experienced in modern times, which was a very public and passionate debate on how the United States House of Representatives would be governed in this new Congress. While many saw this as complete chaos or dysfunction, which in part it was, it's actually how the framers of our Constitution envisioned that some issues would play out in the House of Representatives. The debate on the House rules actually began long before the House convened on January 3rd. Immediately after the midterm elections in November of 2022, House Republicans met and began rewriting our rules. And after several days of proposals, counterproposals, debates, and compromises, the Republican conference finally agreed upon a new set of rules. Rules that would empower the rank and file member of Congress, not just those in leadership positions. These new rules also transformed how the House would handle legislation, especially key legislation that spends taxpayers' money. So when the new Congress convened on January the 3rd, the vast majority of Republicans were excited about passing this new rules package. However, there was one issue that still hung in the balance, an issue that was very important to a handful of others, and that issue was the procedure for removing a sitting Speaker of the House. Now, prior to Nancy Pelosi obtaining the speakership in 2019, the standard procedure for removing a speaker allowed for only one member from either party to introduce a privileged resolution called the motion to vacate the chair. Now, being a privilege resolution meant the House would have to immediately take up the measure and vote on it before they could conduct any other business. A simple majority of the House could then remove the speaker and prompt the election of a new Speaker of the House. But when Pelosi took the gavel in 2019, remind you, with a very slim majority, she changed the House rules to protect her power as Speaker. Under the new Pelosi rule, a resolution to remove the Speaker couldn't be introduced by just any member. It had to be introduced by a member of the Democrat leadership and supported by a majority of the Democrat caucus. Now, this change would help ensure that she would have full reign over the House for the next 4 years, without the looming threat of losing her speakership. But as the Republicans began the 118th Congress, the proposed rule change was that the motion to vacate the chair would only require that any 5 members of the House could introduce a resolution to remove the Speaker. Thus, the standoff began, with 202 House Republicans supporting the new rule, which would require only 5 members to introduce a motion to vacate the chair. But there were 20 members of the Republican caucus that demanded it change back to the historical requirement of only 1 member. For nearly 5 days, the world watched as we struggled with this issue before a deal was finally struck and the rule returned back to its original requirement that at any time, a single member can introduce a motion to remove the Speaker of the House. While some saw these debates and challenges as dysfunction and division, the actual result has made the House Republicans more unified and more committed to fixing the damage done by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats over the past 4 years. Now, I supported Kevin McCarthy as Speaker from the start because I've experienced over time that he has done more to bring the conservative element of the party into the decision-making process than any Speaker in recent memory. However, I also worked to help impose significant changes to our rules to empower every member of the House. Now, following the historic vote for Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, we passed an equally historic rules package that, if used effectively and correctly, it will significantly reform the House of Representatives with tools to make lasting changes. One of the most significant changes to the rules is what we call the single subject matter requirement. This rule prohibits what has been a standard practice of burying spending provisions or other controversial issues within the text of very large bills or must-pass pieces of legislation. Now, this has been the normal operating procedure for many years of burying significant issues deep within other pieces of legislation. But under the new rule, a transportation bill can only deal with transportation, and no longer can it include provisions for increase in spending for climate change or an increase in food stamps. A transportation bill can now only deal with transportation issues. Another significant change is that we now have a 72-hour rule, which means that before a bill can be brought to the floor for consideration, it must sit for 72 hours so every member has an opportunity to read and digest the extent of that legislation. This shuts the door on behind-the-scenes, dark room deals that brings legislation to the floor merely hours before we vote on it. We are also reimposing a 3/5 majority in the House to approve any increases in tax cuts. We've set up a select committee on China and the Communist Party. We're modifying the charter of the Select Committee on the Coronavirus to actually focus its investigative work on the origin of the virus and the gain-of-function research. We're requiring House committees to establish an oversight plan detailing how they will hold the Biden administration accountable. And we're going to bring more transparency to the cost of legislation by requiring the Congressional Budget Office to provide analysis on the inflationary impact of legislation. We've also required the quick transfer of all January 6 committee investigation documents and videos to the House Administration Committee on which I sit, so we can finally get to the bottom of what really happened and make all of this data available to the public. We also established a select subcommittee to investigate the weaponization of the federal government against the rights and the liberties of individual citizens. We also established a rule that requires for any increase in mandatory spending, it has to be offset by a corresponding cut in another area of mandatory spending. And we're restoring the spending reduction account in all appropriations bills so that any reductions in spending are not simply spent elsewhere. The American people made it clear they're ready for a new direction, and the 118th Congress Rules Package gives us the tools to start delivering results. Over the past couple of weeks, I've also been working to help establish the House committees and filling them with Republicans that are dedicated to reform our government to one that is small in size, limited in scope, and is responsible to the American people. While we have a lot of work ahead of us, in the coming 2 years, I believe we have the tools in place to achieve our goal of a nation that is free, safe, and full of opportunity, and a government that's accountable to the American people. God bless you, and may God bless America.